Through you, Mr. Speaker, a couple of questions for the proponent of the bill.
Please proceed.
Thank you very much. I understand the purpose of this bill is to increase the percentage of voters who actually turn out to vote. Could the proponent tell us what evidence there is that early voting does in fact increase the percentage of voters? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the representative for the question. In terms of evidence, I have no numbers in front of me that would indicate that increased voting would occur. I can tell you that, for example, according to a 2016 Gallup poll, I know we may not want to rely on polls, but 80% of Americans support early voting. This support remains consistent across a range of demographic and political groups. So I don't have any hard numbers of the percentage that would increase should this resolution pass, but I do believe that early voting is supported by the general public. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you very much. I'd be interested to share some research that I've done recently with you. In fact, the American Association of Political Scientists and Adam Berinsky, a renowned MIT professor of political science, examined all the research and found that early voting, in fact, decreases voter participation. It increases the number of people who would intended to vote, who are now voting early, but it doesn't actually put up those numbers. So to the proponent, did you consider other ways to increase the percentage of people actually turning out to vote? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to the representative, there were other discussions had at the committee level in terms of other options for early voting, such as potentially no excuse AB voting. But ultimately, we decided that this method of voting would be more supported by the general public and open up the door to a greater number of individuals to vote early. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Cheeseman.
I'd be interested in hearing a bit more about the discussion of no excuse absentee voting, because that would seem to me a way to increase the percentage of people voting without putting an undue burden on the towns. We've heard so much discussion of the effect that might have in terms of increased costs, logistical difficulties. So through you, Mr. Speaker, I'd just be interested in knowing a bit more why that was ruled out. Through you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Representative Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the no excuse AB voting was, I guess you could say, ruled out in light of the fact that we felt that this procedure was would provide greater flexibility to the state of Connecticut and the residents to access early voting, and it would open up the door to more individuals. And in essence, in some respects, it would alleviate some of the burdens placed on towns if, in fact, we were to require or provide for no excuse AB voting. Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you very much. Thank the proponent for his answers. And I just have a few comments to add. I, too, am concerned about the financial and logistical burden this would place on the towns. I understand that what we're discussing today does not outline the final language of any legislation that would result from this, that would empower the towns to do this. But given all the constraints on our municipalities, and in fact they may be facing even greater costs in the future going forward depending on what we as a chamber do this budget cycle, I am very loath to open the door to that kind of burden on them. Simply figuring out how many ballots every polling place is going to have to accommodate the early voting with no history of this, I think is very hard to foresee going forward. So I thank the proponent for his answers. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I will listen with interest to the rest of the conversation. Thank you very much.